بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ويتتعلم وتعنيه والتذكر والتذكير ونفي لفاري فار استفادة وحتى أتماس بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء إلى هدى ودلالة على خير ابتغاء وسلام وطاعته وقرب بثوابه سبحانه وتعالى اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا وانزلنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah. So, inshallah, today what we wanted to look at is that we wanted to look at the fourth trick the Shayṭān will try to trap us with. And this is something that is very difficult to sometimes pick up on, as well as really safeguard oneself from. And so this is why the ulama, they always remind us that we should constantly be checking our intention. So this fourth trick that we're going to mention that the Shayṭān will try to trap a person with is that, as Imam Ghazali says in his work, Satan will then command him to complete the work, but only to gain people's admiration. And so this is talking essentially about the spiritual disease of riya, of ostentation, of showing off, of essentially doing anything for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what the ulama, they refer to as one of the aspects of minor shirk, that the concept of doing something, seeking the pleasure for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is an aspect of a form of shirk, which is not shirk in the sense of actually worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's the seeking of the pleasure, the favor of someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the sense that someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could benefit us. And this is something that the Shayṭān will try to entice us towards, is that he'll allow us to do the good works, but then he's going to try to muddy up those good works by giving us a sinful intention, that he's going to try to entice us to seek out the good pleasure, the good favor, the praise, the attention of other people. And this is so dangerous because as human beings, generally speaking, we like the praise, we like the attention, we like the aspect of being liked by other people. And so it becomes very difficult, especially in the aspect of doing good works. Because the aspect of doing good works is that is something in general that is something good to do. This is why it's referred to as good works, amal salih. However, when we do amal salih, when we do righteous works for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is when we're getting to very dangerous territory. That is where it becomes very dangerous. Because if we do something for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we're placing something other than Allah in the position that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has. Is that we are only the ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are only the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala faqat. Only. That we don't worship anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have to be very, very mindful in relation to what it is that we are doing in terms of why are we doing it. Are we doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purely? Or are we doing it with an ulterior motive in terms of gaining the attention of other people? And this is why we have different examples in terms of the righteous and how they would try to essentially check themselves in regards to this concept of riyā. So for example, there's a story of one of the righteous who he was an individual who for a number of years, if I remember the story somewhat correctly, I believe it was approximately about 20 years, he had prayed in the front row of the masjid, right behind the imam. So for 20 years, he always caught the opening takbir with the imam. So that was basically what he was known for. This was a righteous person who always prayed in congregation right behind the imam. For many ulama, they say that if a person can pray every salat in jama'ah for 40 days, that is a major accomplishment, and that there's different spiritual openings that will happen if a person is able to do that. Just to have 40 days straight where a person prays every salat in the masjid or in the musalla, meaning that they pray their every prayer in jama'ah outside of the home. Again, either in the masjid or the musalla. That if a person is able to do that for 40 days, there are different spiritual openings that person will experience, and ultimately that this inshallah will become at least a hal, at least a state for that person, and then eventually it may become a maqam, a spiritual station. But in any case, this individual, he had done this for 20 years, or so. And so it just so happened that one day after these 20 years or so of praying in congregation for all this time in the front row, right behind the imam, having the first takbir be with the imam, is that all of a sudden he was running late. And as he was getting ready to go to the masjid, he thought to himself, because this is the first time in 20 years that he's ever missed being in the front row of the masjid, all of a sudden he thought to himself, wait a minute, what are all the people going to think if I'm not in the front row? And then as soon as he thought that thought, as soon as that thought came to his mind, he realized to himself that, subhanAllah, all this time, all these years that I've been praying in the front row has not been truly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've been doing it for the sake of other people. Because if I really were doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I wouldn't care what the people thought about whether I'm not in the front row or not. And so because he had that thought come to him, because he realized that his intentions were not sincere, that all those 20 years of praying, he was doing it essentially trying to gain the approval of other people, he went back and he re-prayed all of those prayers. So 20 years of prayers, he remade all of those prayers, because he was worried about the intention that he had behind it. Now the thing is that I'm not necessarily saying that we have to put ourselves at that particular level, but what I'm saying is that this is to the extent that some of the righteous, they looked at it, that doing something for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something that is leading down a very dangerous slope. And again, it becomes very difficult to distinguish between a true intention that is truly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala versus a corrupted intention that is looking for the pleasure of other people. So in order to try to combat this, our teachers have given different pieces of advice in regards to how to try to strive to make sure that our works are truly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not for the sake of other people or some type of status or fame within the society. Is that the first piece of advice is that what we should do is that we should always have certain acts of worship, certain good deeds that we do, that we keep completely 100% hidden from everyone else. To the extent that one of my teachers, he was asked one time in a gathering that we were in, he was asked, how much of your good deeds should you allow your spouse to know? Because anyone that's married, that, your spouse sees everything. Your spouse knows, the most intimate details of you, let alone your acts of worship. So he was asked, how much of our good deeds should we allow for our spouse to know about? And my teacher, he's very blunt oftentimes. And so he responded to the question by saying, none. And he mentioned about him and his wife, how they've been married for, subhanAllah, probably over almost like 40 years or so they've been married. And he says that still to this day, after 40 years, I don't know what she does in her room and she doesn't know what I do in my room. Meaning that when they have their acts of ibadah that they do privately, they have their separate rooms that they go into, and each of them do their own acts of ibadah, and none of them know what the other is doing. And so even to that extent is that trying to have certain acts of worship that we do that are completely between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is one of the things that I'm always kind of thinking about, and it kind of like the thought of it amazes me, even though I don't know what it actually would be the reality of it. But one of the things that I think about is that we look at some of the righteous, and particularly of those of, for example, the Sahaba or the early generations, and we hear and we know about some of their good deeds. So, for example, we know that the likes of Uthman bin Affan is that he used to recite the entire Quran in his tahajjud prayer. That every night he recited the entire Quran in his tahajjud. We know that Abdullah ibn Amr, he was a person who he never missed tahajjud after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had told him how good he was, but it would be even better for him if he got up and prayed the tahajjud prayer. We know about the works of Umar ibn Khattab anhu, particularly when he was Khalifa, and how he would be very selfless in serving the Muslims, and so on and so forth, to the point that Ali ibn Abi Talib, he used to say that you're making it difficult for those that come after you, meaning that whoever is going to be the Caliph after Umar is going to have a difficult time following up his example. We know Abu Bakr as-Siddiq anhu, that, for example, that he used to go and he used to milk the goats for some of the elderly women in the city of Medina, and that he was a support system for many people within Mecca, and all these different things that we know about, particularly some of the more famous Sahaba. One of the things that I always think about is that if these are the things that we know, such that these are the things that they allowed for other people to know about them, what are the things that they kept just between them and their Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know, for example, if Uthman bin Affan is reciting the entirety of the Quran in tahajjud every night and his wife is able to see it, what are the things that he may have done that he just kept between him and his Lord? What are the things that Umar ibn Khattab kept between just him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are the things that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq kept between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are the things that Ali ibn Abi Talib kept between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And so this is one of the things that our teachers mention, is that we should always have some aspect of amal salih that we keep purely to ourselves, that, you know, no one else knows about it, to the extent that we possibly can. You know, and this is why fasting is such a powerful act of ibadah, because fasting is one of the easiest things that a person can do that other people will not necessarily know that the person is doing it. Even to the point that I've heard, and I'm not going to mention which of my teachers, but I've heard about some of my teachers, is that even to the extent that some of my teachers, that they're more famous or more well known, and so they're invited to gatherings often, and so people are trying to feed them and so on and so forth. You know, there are certain situations where sometimes they're doing their supererogatory fasting, and so as to not hurt the feelings of their host, but to keep up with their regular acts of ibadah with their Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, what they'll do is that they will go to the meal, they'll go to the gathering, and they'll move their hands around the food so that it looks like they're eating, like, you know, they're, you know, engaging with everyone at the lunch or whatever the case may be, and they'll move their hands around the food as if they're eating, but in actuality, they never actually put any food in their mouth. So as to not inform people of the act of ibadah they're doing, yani fasting, but at the same time to not hurt the feelings of their host or their person that invited them to this particular gathering. And so having certain acts of worship that we do solely within the realm of the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only. And then when it comes to the aspect of doing things that we have to do in public, is that one of the things that my teacher also mentioned to us is that anything that you do in public, don't ever expect a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. Not to say that you won't receive a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it, but meaning that because it's so easy to have a muddled intention. So like even if a person does have a righteous intention, sometimes what will happen is our intentions will be mixed. So that I do truly want to, and I'm trying to do these things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time there's still, you know, a little thing in me, in my ego, my nafs, that wants other people to recognize me. And so this is why my teacher, he said, anything that you do in public, don't necessarily expect a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. And that's why it's coupled with the aspect of having things that you do in private that no one knows about, so that it's more likely that those things are going to be sincere. Because, for example, for some of us, Sometimes we may do something, and yes, we're trying to somewhat do it in secret, or we're trying to make sure our intention is for the sake of Allah, but internally, deeply, we're hoping it's like, I wouldn't mind if someone actually told, people that I do X, Y, and Z. Or like, you're hoping that, someone might just spill the beans. Like, I'm not going to say it, but if they say it, I'm not going to mind all that much, you know. And so again, but the thing is, that is what we're referring to. That aspect of like even the desire to be known is something that we want to strive to get rid of. Not just that, we're doing these things in secret, but even the desire that we have internally of wishing that someone just catches us. Like, Yani, I'm, praying in the middle of the night of tahajjud, and yeah, I'm trying to, be secretive about it, quote unquote, but it's like, in like a little portion of me is like hoping like, my spouse or someone wakes up and sees me praying tahajjud, and then they tell other people about, how righteous I am because I get up and pray tahajjud and so on and so forth. But the thing is that, really trying to think about these things so that we can strive to come to a point where our intentions are more sincere, so that we do things purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we don't do them for the sake of other people. Because the reality of other people is that other people can't even benefit themselves, let alone us. That if we really were to look at the reality of the world that we live in terms of the dunya, is that nothing in this world can actually benefit itself in a true reality sense of benefit. Is that everything in this world is contingent. It is makhluk, it's a creation. So that means that the creation is dependent upon its creator. We're all depending upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the reality of it really is like, why am I worried about what someone else thinks or what other favor I think that they can do for me, when actually the one that can actually do whatever it is that I'm seeking is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why the person that humbles themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises up. And the person that seeks the approval, or they seek to be raised up by other people, that is the person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala debases, whether in this life or the next, or both. And so this is why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's warned us in different ways about the aspect of intention, is that anything that we do, we want to make our intention purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the most famous example of this is the case of the three individuals who the Prophet informed us of will come on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and they will be of those who had done righteous good deeds. One will be of the shuhada, or so it appears. One will be of the ulama, or so it appears. And one will be of those who would give in sadaqah, those who were affluent, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him this wealth and he gave it out in charity. And the Prophet Muhammad informed us about these individuals, that they'll be brought upon Yawm al-Qiyamah in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask him about the ni'mah, about the blessings that he gave to them. And he'll ask the person who was a shaheed, what did you do for the blessing that I gave you? Meaning, yani, that I gave you shahada. And the person will say, Ya Allah, I fought and I died in your cause. I fought and died for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to the individual, Kadhabt, you've lied. You fought and died so that people will call you brave. And it's been said. And that person will be told to be thrown into the hellfire. The person that was an alim, the person that was a scholar, he'll be brought in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remind him of his blessings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, what did you do with those blessings? And the person will say, Ya Allah, I learned and I taught for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, Kadhabt, you've lied. You've learned and taught so that people will call you a scholar, so that people will think well of you. And it's already been done. So throw him to the hellfire. And then the person that was wealthy and gave in sadaqah, who gave in charity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will remind him of his blessings, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, what did you do with those blessings? And the person will say, Ya Allah, I spent in your cause, I spent for your sake. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again will say, Kadhabt, you've lied. You spent so that people will call you generous. And it's been said, so throw him into the hellfire. And so this is what the Shayṭān wants. The Shayṭān wants us to muddle up or destroy our good works by seeking the pleasure of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have to, it is critical. We can't really express the importance of this. Always, always, always be in constant reflection about what our intentions are, and truly trying to make our intentions for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why our teachers, they mention is that you should always, always, always have deeds that you do purely only in the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the best of your ability. And in the meantime, striving to rid ourselves of the want of other people to know about our good deeds. That we should be sufficed to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Because at the end of the day, only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can truly benefit us in anything that we do. And it's only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are charged to worship. And so this is something that we really, really, we don't want to get this wrong. This trick that the Shayṭān tries to play on us, we don't want to mess this one up, definitely. Because this is something that is very, very, it can be very subtle, and it can be very easy to fall into. And this is why, even from the standpoint of those of us who may be in positions of teaching or da'is or sheikhs or imams or whatever case you want to, whatever title you want to throw out there, we are probably in some of the most dangerous positions. Because the ultimate reality is, what is our intentions really? Are we really doing these things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or do we like to have our pictures on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and all these things? Do we like to have people inviting us to all these fancy gatherings and people calling us all these different titles and so on and so forth? We get to sit up front at the masjid or whatever the case may be. Are we really doing it for that, or are we truly doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And so the thing is that just because a person is in a position of leadership or a position of authority, whatever the case may be, that does not save them from this particular trap of Shayṭān. And if anything, it makes them even more susceptible to it. And so this is why some of the righteous, they used to seek to be obscure from the world, meaning that they used to seek to not be known amongst the people. But the thing is that the ulama of tasawwuf, the ulama of spiritual excellence, what they mention is that the true sincere person is the person that, whether they're known or whether they're not, makes no difference to them. That is the true point of sincerity. Meaning, they leave it up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah declares that they should be known amongst the people, then they're content with that, because that is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they give it its rights. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content or declares that they should be unknown to the people, then they are content with that, and they go about that, giving it its rights, because that is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Having indifference to being known or unknown, that is the truest sign of sincerity. It's a very difficult level to reach, so that's why a little bit more precautious is to not incline towards being known. But the ultimate litmus test of sincerity is when we don't have a desire either way. We don't desire to be known, and we don't desire to be unknown. We are only desirous of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that if He makes us known, tamam, I'm going to give it His haqq. If He makes us unknown, tamam, I'm going to give it His haqq. I'm only here to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm only here to do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has destined for me to do. That is the truly sincere person. That is the point that we ultimately want to come to. But in the meantime, as the Ahl Tasawwuf will say, it's okay in the case of spiritual excellence, it's okay to fake it till you make it. Yani, if we can't, truly rid ourselves of the desire to be seen or known by other people, then we work on doing things in secret, in private, such that it's only between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that inshallah our intentions are more sincere, until we're able to inshallah come to that point where being known or being unknown is equivalent to us. That Whether we're known or whether we're unknown makes no difference. But again, this is something that the Shayṭān is going to try to incline us towards. He's going to try to incline us towards wanting to seek out the good pleasure and the status in the eyes of people and all those things that come with it. And again, this is why it's very dangerous to be in the public sphere. And anyone, and particularly those who have a large following, those who are even more well known than others, many of them will tell you is that the fitna that comes with it as well, is something that most people would not want to deal with, because when you get to a certain level of fame, the other issue that comes about is that everything that you do, everything that you say is going to be scrutinized by everyone. That, especially if you look at well-known celebrities, actors and movie stars and things of that nature, they can't even walk out their house without people, being all in their business, sometimes trying to break into their homes or look into their private windows and selling their address and phone numbers to people and so on and so forth. I mean, who wants to have that be their everyday reality? But even from the standpoint of kind of and when I say this, I'm not saying it in a negative connotation towards them, but just kind of to give us an idea of what we're talking about, like the celebrity imams, those imams and shuyukh and others who are well known, even for them, it can become a very difficult situation of dealing with all the different things that come with being well known. And so there's actually a blessing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keeping a person hidden from the rest of the people, and particularly in terms of one's ability to be more sincere. But again, we want to be to the point where we're truly sincere, such that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does place us in a situation where we're not known by the people, that we're also not in a situation where we're constantly seeking it out. That, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's protected us from being necessarily known, well known throughout the society, but in our hearts we still want that fame. We have a jealousy for those that we see as being like the celebrity imams or the sheikhs or whatever the case may be. Is that we want to come to the point where our intentions, our heart is only towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't go towards anything else. Anything that we love in this world, that we only love it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to love it. That is the part of the meaning of loving for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That I love certain things or certain people because of my love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told me to love them. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told me it's okay to love them. But my ultimate love is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My ultimate ubudiyah, my ultimate slavehood, servanthood is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is where we want to come to. Not to the point of seeking out other people, seeking out their pleasure or seeking out their status or anything like that, but seeking out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all that we do. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make our intentions sincere. May He keep us from falling victim to these traps and tricks of Shayṭān. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us good works that He accepts. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who are not seeking out that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not destined for us. This is why the aspect of contentment is such a blessing. Is that when a person is content, then they are the person that is truly ghani. They are the person that is truly rich. Because even a person who's rich, if they're seeking out other things, meaning that, they have all this money, but they're still in want of other things, then that person is a faqir. That person is impoverished. He's poor. Because as long as you're still in want, because the true meaning of ghani is a person free of need. So the ultimate reality of being ghani is that that's only reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's the only person that's truly ghani, that's truly completely free of need. But the person, in terms of the human aspect of ghani, the person who is in a state where they're not in want of anything in this dunya, meaning that they're content with what it is that they have in this dunya, that is the person that's truly ghani. And the person, no matter how many zeros they have in their bank account, if they're still in want of other things, then that person is faqir. And so, this is something that we should always remember, is that contentment is something that we should all be striving to reach. Being content with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. That's, Allah is sufficient for us, and what an excellent provider He is. Wa ni'mal wakeel. Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sufficient for us, and what an excellent provider that He is. And so, inshallah, we can live out the reality of that portion of the verse, inshallah. So, inshallah, we will leave you all in Allah's care. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to bless you all during these remaining 20 days of the month of Ramadan. SubhanAllah, we're already 1/3 of the way through Ramadan. And, usually after these first 10 days, the rest of the month of Ramadan just starts to kind of speed by. So, please remember to try to take advantage as much as possible through these remaining days, because before you know it, we'll be celebrating the Eid. And so, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us in the remaining 2/3 that we have left, or a little less than 2/3 now. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be of those who truly benefit from this month of Ramadan. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam wa hasbana wa ni'mal wakeel. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.